sinful, right? So the first thing is one thing that I talk about all the time, and so I just want to check in from a show of hands. Are we clear about the Adam and Eve story and the creation story and why that has nothing to do with who and what you are? That story has nothing to do with you being sinful? Just show of hands, because I would love to touch on it if we need to touch on it. All right, I'm gonna touch on it because I don't see enough hands up, and that's important, right? Because again, we're just gonna get a few things out of the way. This will bless your life. You may want to run all around the room after you hear this. So the Adam and Eve story. Now the first thing we must understand, and if you've been around CSC long enough, you know this, that when we're talking about the Bible, we're talking about the Bible from the perspective of metaphor, allegory, and myth. Not myth in the sense of falsity, but myth in the sense of that it's a story that symbolizes something, right? And so what we're reading in Scripture, it's psychological, it's physical, it's astrological, but it's not necessarily literal, right? So this story of Adam and Eve, it's very interesting because when we look at it, again, recognizing that it's a metaphorical story, recognizing that it's an allegorical story, we understand and we see something that's very clear that happens. First and foremost, there are two creation stories. So if you look and go back to Genesis chapter 1 and 2, in the first creation story, we have that 7-day story that, God said, let there be light, and there was light, and then God created the water and all these different things, and then God created mankind, humankind, after its likeness and image, male and female, and said it was good, and God rested. That was it. No garden, no serpent, no tree, no fall, no apple. God created humankind, male and female, in its likeness and image, and said it was good, and rested. End of story. So right there, if we just accept that creation story alone, nothing about that says anything about you being sinful. Nothing about that says that you're sinful. There's no apple, there's no serpent, there's no temptation, right? But then we have this second story. And the reason that you know it's a second story and it's different because actually the order of creation is different. Because in the second story, as we know, God creates Adam and then allows Adam to name the animals, right? Creates the animals second, and then Adam names the animals. In the first story, the animals are created before Adam and Eve, humankind, male and female. So we have the second story, and then the second story we have what we know, right? That there's the apple. God said, don't eat of this tree. The serpent convinces them. They eat of the tree, okay? Now, we would think that because they disobeyed God, that means that there's something wrong, but it's something very clear and interesting in the story that first it says God was walking around the garden. God is an energy. God is a vibration. God is not a person that walks around a garden. So we know that, again, it's a story. It's an allegory. It's a myth, right? It's using this human idea that we have, right? But anthropomorphizing God in this sense as someone who can walk around a garden. God is walking around and he's looking for Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve are hiding. Why are they hiding? Because they believe or they've now become aware of their nakedness. And he calls out for them and they say, we're hiding. And he says, why? He says, because we're naked. God asks a very profound question. Who told you you were naked? Hear this. Who told you you were naked? In other words, I as God, I as this thing that created you and loved you, I'm not seeing you that way. In that moment, I'm not seeing you that way. But the punishment, what happened is, because you believe that there's something wrong with you, you can no longer be in paradise. That was the metaphor, and that's what that story was teaching. Now we know that on another level. Why? Because there's an angel that's placed in front of the garden, right? And that angel is in the east. The east is the right side. The right side, as we know, represents this place of enlightenment. It represents the place that when we're in meditation, we leave the left reasoning analytical side and move to the east, the right side, the side of light. The reason why the cherubim, that angel, was sitting at the east was because they had blocked themselves from the reality of their wholeness. They had blocked themselves from the reality of all that they really were. And so as long as you believe that story, you can no longer be in paradise. But it was not a judgment about all of humanity that we're wrong, bad, sinful, not good, and because of Adam's sin, we all are sinful. That's not what that story was about. So we got to get that out of the way. Okay? So now some of us may be saying, oh, wow, Adam and Eve, okay, that was cool. I never heard that. And that's interesting. But, this Bible says a lot of other stuff. Okay, all right, you got me there, right? But what about the all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, right? What about we are born in sin and shapen in iniquity, right? The Bible is very clear that there's something wrong with us. But you're saying it's 100% guaranteed by God that we're sinless, right? Now, if you were here for Easter a couple years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, "You are the Son of God" is the message that I preached. I broke this down, but I want to get it here. We need to establish this foundation in order to move on. So this idea, now first of all, sin, the word sin. In the New Testament, this Greek word sin is actually an archery term. And it simply means to miss the mark. So if I'm an archer, I pull my bow, and I miss the bullseye, I sinned. That's what it is. Now that's a different energy, right? Can you feel that? It's a very different energy than you're condemned to hell by God, right? That's not what that word was really signifying, right? I love in A Course in Miracles, it says sin is an error that can be corrected. But let's get deeper into these verses. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. We are born in sin and shapen in iniquity. Now again, I say the Bible is highly symbolic. And what's interesting, if you study the mystical tradition of Kabbalah, you'll understand that actually there are at least 7 layers of understanding within every story. And so what happens, as many of us did as children, whether it was in a Jewish context or a Christian context or some form of a Judeo-Christian context, we learn these stories the literal way so that we can then learn the deeper truth. This is also why Jesus taught in parables, right? He taught these stories, but there was always a layer underneath it. And so this idea was pointing us to something very interesting. For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Now, in the Hebrew alphabet, we have 22 letters. The 21st letter is called sin or shin. Okay. And again, as I said, we have this mystical understanding that's also an astrological understanding, right? So this idea of all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God was based on this idea that we recognize that in 9 months we're born, yes? But we know that a full calendar year and an astrological year is 12, right? Okay. So there was this mystical idea that as we come in after 9 months, we haven't completed the full 12-year cycle. So what they were offering is this idea that all have come just to the 21st letter. We haven't completed the full cycle of 22. All have sinned, all have reached shin and fallen short. And the idea, the mystical understanding is that we come back here to remember, to be restored back to our wholeness, to come back to Eden, right? That's the mystical understanding of both of these passages, right? That sin, again, that word sin, if you look in the Hebrew, was taking us back to the letter shin. And it was a symbolic way to talk about this idea that we come here and must remember in order to come back to wholeness. But it had nothing to do with shame, guilt, and there was something wrong with you.